an interesting conversation the other day. I was on Errol and the Bad Guy. I was talking to Helwani, and the topic had come up about Jon Jones hinting that he had a big fight coming up. And we were doing a back and forth, Errol and I, as to what do we make of that. And much as I told you guys over a week ago when Jon came out with this, look, he's really only got one option. Unless he's moving up to heavyweight and fighting Stipe Miocic, he does not have a big fight. He may have big fight news in his world, right? If he's got a fight, that'd be a big deal to him. But in the scope of MMA, there aren't any big fights for Jon Jones right now at 205 pounds. Particularly when one of the biggest fights the industry could even make was Jon versus Daniel Cormier. That's a distant thought. That's a topic that's not even coming up. So it did kind of beg the question, is he talking about moving up to heavyweight to take on Stipe? How do we get there? First off, on the simple basis that there aren't any big fights for him at 205 pounds. Right now, in addition to that, it appears to me that we've got a couple of fights that a number one contender will emerge from, right? We got Johnny Walker getting ready to take on Corey Anderson. We've also got Dominic Reyes getting ready to take on Chris Weidman. But it would seem as though whoever Jon's next opponent is going to be at light heavyweight is going to be one of those four names that I just mentioned, of which those contests are still upcoming. Then, if you want to have some parity and some fun and get Jon into a big fight, yeah, you could move him into heavyweight, and all of a sudden there's all sorts of excitement. But if you're going to move Jon up to heavyweight, he's got to move right into a title fight, right? He's not leaving 205 pounds, bouncing up to heavyweight. Oh, and by the way, there's no title on the line. Okay, great. Yeah, I understand that I'm stating the obvious, and this doesn't make me some kind of great MMA mind for pointing that out, but I'm just laying the groundwork, which then leaves you with a hypothesis that it is Stipe. So, the way this show works, if you guys haven't seen it or missed it, one of us has to go first. Ariel went first. So everything that I just said to you right there, Ariel said. He said all of my thoughts. I didn't really have anywhere to go with it, but I had brought this to you guys a couple of weeks ago, and Ariel had come to the same opinion. But I'm staring at Ariel. I'm looking at him face to face and going, wait a minute, he knows something. He knows something more. He's presenting this as though he's speculating, but Ariel has a hold of something here. And I called him on it. I said, Ariel, come on, I talk to you all the time. I've known you a long time. You got a look in your eye. You know something. And he wouldn't crack. He absolutely would not crack, but he continued to give me that look in the eye like the cat that ate the canary. And I said, okay, Ariel, you don't want to reveal something. Let me ask you this another way. Have you talked to Jon Jones recently? No, I haven't talked to Jon. Okay. Have you talked to Jon's manager recently, Malky? Yes, talked to him this morning. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. So once we start to dissect this thing, essentially, no, there is no news, and no, Ariel wasn't sitting on an announcement. However, he could at least confirm that Jon is interested in going to heavyweight and fighting Stipe. Great. Fine. But let's take a look at that. Because that, in many ways, creates more problems than it solves. Would we like to see Jon Jones versus Stipe? Yes. Sure we would. Would we like to see that more than we would like to see Stipe versus Daniel Cormier? I don't know. I suppose now we could have a back and forth, but I think that we could at least conclude, draw-wise and excitement-wise, we've got about a little bit of a wash right there. There would be something special to see in the trilogy, Daniel Cormier and Stipe. There's also something to be said for having a totally fresh fight that we had never considered, which is Jon Jones versus Stipe. This whole champ versus champ thing turned out to fizzle just a little bit. It wasn't quite the excitement that we thought it was going to be. By example, if you would go back and look at the first time that those waters were ever tested, which was Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Part 1, surprisingly, that actually wasn't as big of a night as business as people would have thought it would have been. That wasn't the must-see, must-attraction just because you had two champions. It just wasn't. Now, the second time did a little better, and the third time, now that we know anybody can win, and this is anybody's ball game, and we've seen it go each way, could really be something even more special. But here's the problem that I think is worth discussing, because this is what everybody's going to have to consider. Do we do more good than bad if we move Jon Jones up? By example, is Jon going to stay up? Because one thing that's going to happen is we are going to burn the light heavyweight division. We're going to set a match to that thing right away. We've seen this done before. Henry Cejudo's going through a little bit of it right now, where he saved the flyweight division but now it looks like he wants to defend his title in the bantamweight division. What do you do at the flyweights? They got to be able to get on with it. We've seen where George slipped in, grabbed the 85-pound belt, walked away, and the big mess that created, and even a rejection of George's new offering that he wants to come in and fight Khabib at 155, particularly if it's going to be a one-off. So it does beg the question in the long term, is the juice worth the squeeze on this? By example, if Jon goes up and takes on Stipe, we leave light heavyweight, which is in a little bit of shambles right now. Tons of talent, just not the storylines, right? It's in a little bit of shambles. Do we just leave it without a champion for X amount of time? If Jon goes up and battles with Stipe, what happens next? Does he stay at heavyweight? If he beats Stipe, does he give Stipe a rematch, or does he guarantee that he'll give Cormier a rematch? Or is it a one-off? He's going to go up, try to grab the gold, drop back down to 205, in which case you will leave heavyweight now in shambles. Heavyweight being the premier weight class in all of combat. Does not need somebody from a smaller division coming up, grabbing all the thunder and running away. It could just create a long-term problem. None of these stop us before we get started, but these are all things that have to be considered and have to be looked at. So, is the Stipe Jones fight some kind of needle mover that is just so exciting that it's worth the damage and the carnage that it's going to create inherently? It's just the way it goes with this champ business. It's just the way that it goes. Is it really worth that? And what do you do with Daniel in the meanwhile? Possibly you solve the Daniel problem. Possibly you move Jones up versus Stipe as a way of getting Daniel and Jones back together. Now, that's a risk that nobody would really be willing to take, because that has a foregone conclusion that Jon Jones gets to jump over Stipe. That would be a little bit of an aggressive assumption. But say that's the assumption you went with, I'm not sure it would happen that fast either. I mean, don't forget, if Jon Jones was to beat Stipe and it was a really great fight, perhaps the fight everybody wants to see is Jon Jones versus Stipe Part 2. Or it goes the other way, Stipe beats Jon, but it's a really great fight. You want to see Jones versus Stipe Part 2. Either way, the one thing that you're left with is a consensus that now 205 pounds is a mess. I don't have the hugest problem with that, and I don't think that that's something that needs to stop us. I like the champ theme. I like the parody. I like that guys are able to move around. But when it happens, there are unintended consequences. And I'm not sure that doing business with Jon Jones of that level, while that would be good for Jon, who has nothing significant to do for a meaningful period of time at 205 pounds, he just doesn't. Not his fault even, but he doesn't. It would seem as though you could make Jon very happy, but it may not be an overall good play.